Welcome to the Audit Committee meeting of the 31st of July 2025. Have I got any apologies for absence, please? Sorry, Councillor MacDonald.
I'm substituting for Councillor Nestroff.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I am substituting on behalf of Councillor Hackwell. I'm substituting on behalf of Councillor Hackwell, who sends his apologies.
Thank you very much, Councillor Perfect. Can I sign the record of the meeting held on the 20th of March, please, as correct?
Agreed.
Agreed, thank you. I don't have any urgent matters, but tonight the independent member wishes to say something. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Councillor Hazel for the opportunity. I want to congratulate Councillor Hackwell on behalf of the Audit Committee on receiving the British Empire Medal, although he is not present today. I also want to congratulate James Larkin and the Counterfraud team for being shortlisted for the Institute of Revenue's Ratings and Valuation 2025, Protecting the Public Purse Award, one of only 6 teams selected. A great achievement that reflects their professionalism. I'm sure the committee joins me in wishing them the best of October's results. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody would like to join in officially recognising both of these things. Thank you very much. Now, have we got any declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests or other significant interests, please? No, thank you. I move now to item 5, which is the Treasury Management Outturn Annual Report, and that will be followed by the Treasury Management Report. And I thank the officers for ensuring that these are both coming together, as the committee had requested that there was more alignment previously. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So, as we report on another year for the Council's Treasury Management, it might be worth just reminding members what the purpose of Treasury Management here at Medway is. It's for managing our cash flow, to make sure we have the cash available when it's needed, and it's also to help fund the capital programme. CITFA also defined Treasury Management as the management of local authorities' investments and cash flows, its banking, money market and capital market transactions, the effective control of risks with those activities and the pursuit of optimum performance consistent with those risks. So the report summarises the Treasury Management activities for the year 2024-25 and our compliance within the indicators and limits set. One thing I do want to point out with this is, as at the end of March 2025, our borrowing, unfortunately, does exceed our capital financing requirement, CFR, and paragraph 5.8 on page 21 refers. The CFR is the value of our long-term assets that have not been funded through grants or contributions, revenue funding or capital receipts. Keeping borrowing below the CFR demonstrates that borrowing has been used only to fund capital expenditure. It doesn't mean that the borrowing in itself is affordable. In this case, the borrowing in excess of the CFR position is temporary, and the reason for that position is explained below the table in that paragraph. Treasury strategy was approved by Council before the start of that financial year and sets out the overall limits for the amount of borrowing. The operational boundary is the maximum amount of borrowing that the Council expects that may be needed at any one time. This was set at £676 million. That is mentioned in paragraph 5.11 on page 21. Reports that our outstanding maximum balance was just under £586 million. We're permitted to exceed this limit, but not the higher authorised limit, which includes a contingency buffer. This limit was set at £743.5 million. The table in paragraph 6.4 shows the limits for the proportion of loans maturing in various time frames. In addition to the percentages shown, a monetary limit of £150 million was set for loans repayable within 12 months. There was one brief breach of this previously reported in Q1 of 2024-25. That was the only one. Still on the subject of debt maturity profile, the graph at paragraph 6.1 on page 23, that shows the repayments due in each year. In an ideal world, our maturities would all be spread evenly over the years. However, in recent years, the advice due to interest rates and the change of those, the high interest rates, and now the fact that interest rates are starting to fall, we have been advised by our Treasury management advisors to favour short-term borrowing. So what this has done, in effect, means that we've got quite a large amount of loans that are due to be repaid in the coming 2 to 3 years. We've tried to spread that a little bit more, but we'll obviously keep that under review as the market conditions change. Our aim is to keep borrowing to a minimum, which is why we have relatively little available for Treasury investments, with the exception of our property funds, which I'll come to in a minute, and the loans to our subsidiary companies. Other than that, we have no long-term Treasury investments. The graph at paragraph 10.4 on page 30 shows our benchmark investment performance, and it's in line with expectations. Medway is represented by a slightly larger, darker dot, but shows our returns are within the expected range, which is those tram lines. There are higher returns, but they were likely to involve more risk. So lastly, I want to just mention the property fund investments. When we took those out several years ago, they were at just under £18 million. As of March 2024, the value had fallen to £16.3 million, but increases to those values during the last financial year. They stood at £17.3 million by the 31st of March 2025. This is detailed in paragraph 6.5 on page 24. In addition to this, the funds continue to generate income of around 770k each year. Under the current accounting rules, this income is credited to the council's revenue budget. With regards to the movements in the value of those, there is a statutory override, which we thought was going to come to an end quite shortly, but it has been extended. What that override means is that if there's changes in values, rather than it hitting our income and expenditure accounts revenue, it can be taken to an unusable reserve, which is where it currently sits. Lastly, on that, members may remember that Lothbury, which was another property fund that we had invested in, that ceased trading at the end of May 2024. At that point, the value that we recognised it had lost was around £1.4 million, which we allowed for in the closure of the previous year's accounts. Of the £3.6 million that was still recognised as a value, we've received £3.2 million back in repayments, and we are still getting further repayments. I still expect us to receive all of that back. The remaining £400,000 I'm hoping will come this year, but that depends on them selling their assets. With that, sorry, it's a long introduction, so I'm now happy to take any questions members may have on that.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Andy. Obviously the breaching of the CFR limit was down to government not paying some grant. I'm assuming we've incurred some interest on that amount of money. Will we get that back? And I'm just wondering if there's any legal implications for us breaching the CFR. Thank you.
So, with regards to, I'll take the last point first. With regards to breaching the CFR, if over a period of a couple of years you breach the CFR, then that is in contravention of the Prudential Code and Treasury Management Code. But with regards to this, we know exactly what it was for and the reason for it. My understanding, we should have had the money back in now, just now. A week ago we hadn't, but I'm led to believe it was due this week. I don't know. It's something I suppose we could approach government about, but I think it's probably unlikely they're going to pay any interest back to us that we may have incurred.
Councillor Lawrence, you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you. I'm reminded the cheque is in the post type thing. I'll just, there was just something else in here. So if I understand the position on debt redemption, we're having to redeem debt currently at that we borrowed at a much lower rate, and we're now borrowing at short-term higher rates, but sometimes we're going from 2% to 5 and a bit percent. I'm assuming all of those additional costs of interest have been built into the councils, and we're not worried about any overspends in that area. And I'm just wondering whether we're seeing higher interest rates for a lot longer than we budgeted for. Because I remember having this discussion before about how much we'd stress tested the interest rates when we were pulling the budget together.
So, when the budgets are put together each year, part of our revenue budgets are our interest and financing budget, which deals specifically with the interest expenses that we have, which is obviously the heading you're looking at. We look at all of that and we obviously make projections on that. And I have to say, when we actually came to the outturn of that budget, we were very close to the monitoring that we had done. So I think the way we were able to build and monitor that budget, I hope Phil would agree that we've got assurance that we've got a quite good way of doing that now. I think, unfortunately, the markets are such now that higher interest rates are. We were used to incredibly low interest rates for quite a long period of time. We do know, and it's obviously you'll see that in the tables from our Treasury advisors. Those bank rates are predicted to come down, but they will not go anywhere near as low as they were. And unfortunately, that's just the changing market. But we have budgeted for those changes and will continue to do so in the hope that things do, interest rates do go down. But I will say that also the local authority lending market is not quite as plentiful as it once was, and all of those supply and demand drive interest rates higher than you would hope they would be.
Sorry, Chair, just one final question. I was just trying to get my head around how much we'd actually borrowed in the last year. And if I look at, on page 22, the table at the bottom, net borrowing has gone from broadly 300 million to 418 million. Is that, that would represent the increase in borrowing effected in the last financial year?
Yeah, that will be the net increase, but obviously that will be us renewing some borrowing and taking out new borrowing. But yes, yeah, absolutely. Your understanding is correct. Yeah. There is an increase, yeah.
Any other questions? Councillor Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. My question is probably more for the Chief Operating Officer. I'm just interested in terms of following on from the back of Councillor Lawrence's question, just around the minimum revenue protections MRP. Obviously, noting the quite significant, the rise in borrowing from 297 million March 24 to 417 million in March 25, and also noting obviously within the report, and it's quite well known, we're in a position of exceptional financial support. I'm just interested, particularly with the context of the Treasury management strategy for the current financial year with a significant number of capital projects. I'm just interested in terms of your view, in terms of the minimum revenue protection, in terms of obviously the interest rate position and also that increased level of borrowing. Thank you.
Well, obviously, all of the borrowing that you've alluded to there attracts minimum revenue provision. We have to make minimum revenue provision on it. Apart from, there's a fairly sizable chunk, which is the borrowing we take from wood lending to MDC. Now, I don't make MRP on that because it's using SITFA's parlance regarded as performing loan. So that mitigates to some extent. But yes, when Andy talks about reflecting the impact of that borrowing in our revenue budgets, that takes into account both the interest and the MRP contribution that we need to make. But yeah, obviously, when the more you borrow, the bigger the impact on revenue, yeah.
Do I have any more questions? Thank you. Vice Chair, please.
I move the recommendation. Treasury Management Outturn Annual Report.
Thank you. I'll move on to item 6, the Treasury Management Report for the first quarter of 25-26, and I'll ask Andy to introduce that one too, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, as in the title, this covers the period April through to the end of June for the current year. It forms part of a whole suite of reports that come here. So there are the Q1, the Q3, the mid-year, and the Outturn report, as well as the strategy. Is anticipate that interest rates are likely to reduce over both the current and next financial years. Paragraph 4.5 on page 38 shows the latest forecasts from Link available at the time this report was produced. I think we're looking at December 2026 as being a time when we can get interest rates down to what the market considers to be probably the lowest level they're going to reach. Obviously, that will depend on economic conditions as to what happens there. So we are expecting a further base rate change before the end of the calendar year. Obviously, with that, we'll be looking at those things when we are producing budgets and we're monitoring against that and looking at our borrowing. During quarter one, again, we were recommended by our Treasury advisors to avoid long-term borrowing, and you can see that because interest rates are falling. But we'll constantly review that, and I regularly talk with Phil to look at our position and where we should go with any borrowing we do have to take out. So the position right now, today, is showing just over £90 million of borrowing maturing this current financial year, 130 million the following year, and a further 110 million. So I think, as mentioned in the previous report, the maturity profile isn't ideal, but it just is how it is at the moment. So what we'll be doing is to reduce the borrowing where we can, where cash flow allows us to do that, and we regularly review our cash flow with regards to that. Loans arranged this quarter are all short-term with maturity dates in the current financial year, but we do try and mix those up where we can. So new loans this year, some have been to replace maturing loans and others to fund capital expenditure, but more has been repaid than taking out, meaning the total debt reduced in the quarter from 586 to 488 million, and that's detailed on page 40. Borrowing levels are now below the capital financing requirement at the end of the quarter. again, as we mentioned in the Outturn report, that was a temporary issue at that point in time, but things are back as they should be. On the LOBO front, whilst in the previous year we did have one lender exercise their options, none have done so in the last financial year. That will be to increase the rate payable, and then we would have to make the decision whether we agreed with that or we ended the loan by repaying it. As a net borrower, as we said before, we don't have a lot of money to invest. Most of our Treasury balances are required for day-to-day cash, so most of the cash we do have is on deposit with banks or our CCLA money market fund. Our performance based on low level of is based on a low level of risk, and we take out cash investments in line with our peers, as shown on the graph in paragraph 8.2 at the top of page 43. Lastly, on the property funds, there was a very small increase in the valuation as at the end of this quarter, but again, the returns we're getting through those investments, through the dividends, if you like, are still holding up well at this point. So you'll still be keep an eye on how those valuations are doing, and obviously something that we'll review each year, especially with regards to the Treasury strategy when that comes. And our financing costs, we mentioned the interest and financing budget as at the end of Q1, they are expected to be outturned within the budget that we've set for this year, but we'll obviously review that through each round of monitoring, and we'll report back next to you in the mid-year review. And that's all I need to say, but if anyone's got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Lead off with Councillor Lawrence again.
I've always got a question, Chair. Can you just, if I've understood rightly, this new figure called long-term debtors that's shown on page 39, we've just recategorised certain loans as investments to debtors. Is that basically what's happened, Andy?
That is exactly. The long-term debtors are our loans to Medway Development Company.
Perfect.
Or our investments in that through loans, yes.
Okay. And we're just keeping in line with the CIFPA standard, are we?
That's correct, yes.
Right. I was just intrigued by, we've managed to pay off £100 million worth of debt in the first quarter. I don't know if we found some money at the back of the settee, or how have we actually managed to do that? Because I didn't think, unless we've done lots of big asset disposals to pay down that debt, can you just outline whereabouts that's actually happened without too much detail, Andy? Thank you.
I think if I give an overview, at the beginning of each financial year, there are quite a lot of grants from government that are received. So cash flow tends to be the stronger for us at that point in the year with some large things. So what happens is if loans come up to be repaid, redeemed, we will only take out new loans if cash flow requires us to do that. So we haven't been required to do that, so therefore we've repaid and not had to take out new borrowing. We obviously have to review that in our daily Treasury as we go along and factor forward what we think we're going to need in the, each month. And during each month, our cash flow will ebb and flow. So at the beginning of the month, when we get council tax income, we tend to have quite a lot of cash. But by the end of the month, when we're paying salaries and other things, it's the opposite way round. So it is just us managing that cash flow. But as we said, we want to keep borrowing to the minimum we can. So where we can internally borrow or reduce our external borrowing, that's what we will do.
Thank you. That explains it absolutely perfectly. So you genuinely are managing cash as you need and dipping your toe into the market as you need to. So when we come back to our next meeting, that number is likely to have increased as the effect of those grants have gone off and we find ourselves needing more cash.
I think it's that. There will be probably a further need for lending to our subsidiary as that happens regularly throughout the year with projects in it, and our own capital projects as well that we're undertaking as we go along. We know within the capital programme we have a large programme for temporary accommodation, and there I'm aware, because we keep in touch with our colleagues in housing, that in the coming months there will be some large purchases going on through there that probably will require us to go out and borrow at that point in time for cash flow purposes. So more than likely, yes. Yeah.
Just one more question, Chair. I was just wondering, obviously the asset disposal programme is an intrinsic part of the financial recovery programme. I'm just wondering what feedback you're getting from colleagues on that side of the council in terms of how well that programme is going. And ultimately, are we going to see a sort of net reduction in debt? Because that's the aim of the asset disposal programme. But, you know, what I'm seeing is at the end of the year, we've increased the debt year on year. And there's a sort of a sidebar question to Phil, really, is does it get to a point where you would actually say it wouldn't be prudent to borrow that money for a project if we got to that point in terms of how we would manage the debt interest repayments, for example? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I mean, we tend to look at capital investment on a case-by-case basis, but you're right, with any capital investment, the benefits of it don't kick in immediately. You get concrete out of the ground, and so it's got to be part of a longer term plan, isn't it? But we are in a position at the moment where that borrowing is hitting revenue now. When we conclude the purchases of the assets that we're buying for temporary accommodation, that is going to be a hit on our revenue now. We've reflected that in our financial plans at the moment, and that budget is affordable. But as we're looking at our medium-term financial plan, we need to factor that in and make sure that the revenue budget can sustain that investment. Yeah.
In terms of the asset disposal?
Oh, the asset disposal programme. Yes, sorry. There's a number of assets have now been identified and they're going to auction. So a number have already been sold, and actually they've been sold for values in excess of the reserve kind of levels that we'd set. It's not huge money at this stage, but we're into the a few million rather than a few 100,000. So it's positive.
Councillor MacDonald.
Yeah, mine's only a quick clarity point following on from Councillor Lawrence, I suppose, is when are we getting our first payment, when are we getting our substantial payments from MDC? You mentioned before in these meetings, when are we actually going to get payments from that as a council?
I think what the original premise was that we were building to sell, and the plan was they borrow for a couple of years during construction phase, sell the units, repay the loans. But the strategy has changed now to this private rented, which means that the loans are now converted into much longer term loans, and that's why they remain on the balance sheet, and that debt continues to go up. But what I will say is that the payments, the regular payments from the rental income that the company pays to us should match and exceed what we're paying out on those loans. We've restructured it all to reflect the fact.
But is there I mean, thanks for that, Phil, but is there a plan when there be a substantial payback? Have we got a year when that will happen? Because obviously we've got devolution, we've got everything else going on. Will there be a time where we're going to get the money back? Or even I know they're paying the rental stuff, but is there a time when we're going to get a lump sum? Because that'd be helpful for the council, obviously. And I know it from just dipping in and out every now and again. I see it was 1 year, then another year, then it's 27, 28. I saw the last estimate. Is that still the strong estimate from you, as best you can, that we will get a lump sum at a certain point?
I can't give you a figure now, but there are units that are going to be sold. So some of the later units on Chatham waterfront will be sold. Now some of those that were scheduled to be sold might be a short hold for a couple of years before we then go to the market with them, because the market's not great at the moment. But yes, over the medium term, I would expect to see some of those units being sold and lumps of debt being repaid.
But just to finish, if it wasn't for us then backing them up, they wouldn't be they wouldn't be able to, they're lucky to have us carrying on and backing them up and doing what we're doing. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to succeed, would they? So, okay. Thanks, Phil. Thanks.
Chair, can I just add, I think it's a really good point, Dan, actually, about that. But just bear in mind, I think the debt interest repayments MDC are making are way above what they're borrowed at. So the council is getting a revenue from them. And I think it's that revenue that actually represents the profit, because ultimately all of that land is hard to develop. No private developer would have developed that land. So, and I think there's temporary housing, just through some of the conversations, I think the temporary housing are buying 73 properties, I think, in and around Chatham. So it may well be that we just might be recycling a bit of money, but actually the debt on MDC goes down and the council gets the assets. So.
I mean, just through you, Chair, once more, and not for you, Andy, to have to put you on the spot, but with the government, the local government reorganisation, would it? You're going to try, Phil. I know. But would that? You know, I don't want to. Well, it is screwy. It's audit, right? I'm just wondering that you must have. I know you would have. There must be a plan of where that would fall if we end up going elsewhere. I mean, what happens?
There's two elements to the balance sheet here. So what we've lent to the company, that's a debt owed to Medway Council, and it will be a debt that's owed to whatever the successor local authority is. In terms of the asset to that, the 100% owned company and its assets will also form part of that same local authority. It'd be a subsidiary of that same local authority.
I just have to actually, once again, Councillor McDonald, you made a very interesting point, but actually the converse of that is the emergency financial support, which is sitting there as a debt, will become the debt of Gravesham and Swale. So there are swings and roundabouts. At least with MDC, we haven't got loads of horrible land that was hard to develop.
I'm supportive of it.
I've got a question on MDC and their loans as well, because I've looked at these figures. And MDC land and projects have actually paid back money, and then they've they've borrowed it back under the private rented sector at less money. So we actually have them playing whatever with that. And I'm a little disappointed, because I've always had a problem with this particular debt, because I do still think that we have no control. We've only got the control about what the interest rate is on any particular day. But I'm not here to run MDC, or down or up. Thank you.
But Chair, we own it 100%. We have total control. If we wanted to liquidate the assets tomorrow, all we've got to do is give them the instruction to liquidate the assets. But whether you'd get all your money back would be a different matter.
Yeah, but we don't manage that company. That is actually. Yeah, we're just shareholders on it, yeah.
But no, I think this is very important, Chair. We're not just shareholders.
We are.
We are shareholders, which means
But
whilst we don't
previously.
have executive control, at the end of the day, a shareholder's vote could tell MDC to do whatever the council wanted to do.
That is true if you're the principal shareholder, yes.
Some of that. No, but you know,
We always have a go at MDC.
so.
We should.
So, in terms of the control that we have, what the articles reserve to the shareholder, which is us, the council, is agreeing a business plan every year.
Yes.
So we have to agree what's on that business plan, and actually, you know, it does depend on getting the right NEDs managing it.
Yes.
That understand what the company is and why we established it in the first place. Now, I think in the case of MDC, we have definitely got that. And that's why when they are taking on those really hard to develop sites that no other developer would take on, and they're not assuming a profit level that a that an external private developer would want. You know, the sort of 20% touch. They're accepting a profit margin of, say, 4 to 7%. You're right. The company is it's its own entity, and it's got a board of directors that makes those decisions. But there is some influence that, as a 100% shareholder, we can exercise, and ultimately we can appoint and dismiss the Neds. Sorry.
Chair, can I just say, just to put it on, I'm not against the company at all and doing that difficult job of developing. I just wanted to ask the question about that money, or whether there was a table or a plan when it would be all paid back, or needed to be paid back, for example. I'll shut up now.
Any other questions? Vice Chair, please.
I move the recommendation at page 37 that the committee is asked to note the Treasury management out. Oh, am I? Yeah.
That's it.
Sorry, I thought I was reading the same thing again.
You was on it. No, you was on it. You're on it.
The committee, yeah. I'll start again. I move the recommendation at page 37 that the committee is asked to note the Treasury Management Outturn annual report.
Now we're on to item 7, which is the internal audit and counter fraud surveys for 2025. And I ask the head of internal audit and counter fraud shared service, James Larkin, to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So some of our performance measures are linked to satisfaction with the service, and we issue surveys to gauge the wider level of satisfaction across the organisation. Now, I don't propose to take you through each individual question, but we'll give you an overview of the results from each survey, and I'll pause for questions after each survey to try and make things a little bit easier. So the internal audit survey was issued to service managers and higher, including members of this committee, as they are the most likely to interact with internal audit, although service managers were encouraged to pass the survey to operational managers and supervisors who may have had interaction with internal audit. Now, we have 34 responses this year, which is our highest to date, and this increase is attributed to a marked increase in responses from other managers and supervisors. Now, that does make it difficult to calculate a percentage response rate, as we don't have a clear picture of numbers of who received the survey. The results are detailed in Appendix 1, starting on page 55. Responses were spread across almost all divisions of the Council, plus 3 from elected members. As in previous years, roughly half of respondents were aware of or had read the Internal Audit Charter, so this has been distributed to service managers via email in the first instance, while we look at longer term options, including publication on the staff intranet. There was a slight decrease in those indicating they had a good understanding of the role of internal audit. These results appeared to be linked to the increase in responses from operational managers who may not be as involved as service managers, or at least not as frequently. Now, a significant number of respondents indicated that training on the role of internal audit would be useful, and more dates for the complete Medway Manager Training Programme, of which internal audit is part of the core responsibilities section, have already been added to try and cater for this. There was also an increase in respondents not feeling sufficiently involved in preparation of the audit plan, as well as an increase in the number of people not feeling they received sufficient communications about upcoming audits. Now, risk consultation and planning communication is directed to service managers, and all the negative responses have come from operational managers. So what we need to consider in the future surveys is whether certain questions are only directed at specific respondents to ensure people are not asked for their satisfaction on areas where they have no involvement. Demonstrating compliance with core principles has remained relatively consistent with previous years, and only 2 responses of disagree were received in relation to the statement that the team is in the right part of the council and has enough resources to effectively carry out its role. Now, based on the comments accompanying those responses, this is likely driven by the resourcing issues experienced during 2024-25. Overall satisfaction was broken down into 2 areas: satisfaction with services available and satisfaction with services received. This is due to the fact that some respondents may not have had interaction with internal audit over the previous year. Their services available scored an average of 7.71 out of 10, while services received scored 8.76 out of 10. And positive satisfaction, which are scores of 8 or higher, came from 88.2% of the 17 respondents who had received services from us in the last 12 months. Now that's slightly below our target of 90%. Any specific comments received are detailed in the report along with the appropriate response, as well as any compliments received. An action plan to address highlighted areas is at Appendix 3 on page 83, but it should be noted that this covers actions for both internal audit and counter fraud, the results of which we'll discuss next, but I'll pause there in case anyone's got any questions on the audit survey.
Dependent member.
Thank you. A couple of questions for James on internal audit review. Page 57.3.3 under division. Why is the HR number in 2024-25 marked as NA? The second question is, to boost survey responses, have you considered offering incentives such as an additional annual leave day awarded through a jackpot system?
Back in 2023 we had HR as separate, but HR is now part of the Finance and Business Improvement Division, so the responses received from any HR officers are now under that line. But obviously because we're including results from a previous year, that one is still in there. Obviously next year that line will go. Right, incentive. Yeah, we've had some discussions about that, and we have kind of, jokingly, there's been discussions about having some sort of Amazon voucher or something for someone that's selected at random. We may well do that. I might have to put my hand in my pocket and try and sort that out. But no, we are. I mean, it's good. It is good because the level of responses have gone up, which is in part down to, obviously we've gone to a slightly wider distribution. We're doing everything we can. I mean, this year I was putting messages out to all service managers on Teams. I was sending email reminders. They were probably fed up with me, which is why they didn't do it. So we are doing what we can to try and encourage participation. I think there's an element of people are extremely busy, bearing in mind this goes out just at the end of financial year, one financial year, beginning of another. So you know, people have got to have the time to do it. But yeah, we were saying what a hard time you lot have been giving us. And you've got a few of them to actually eliminate.
Thank you for that, James. What I would say is we managed to get 3 responses from elected members. I would remind people in this room that we should be supporting that. I know who the 3 were. Sorry?
4 this year, 25.
Sorry, did I? I beg your pardon. 4. I'm very pleased that you were one of them. We're missing 1, that's all.
Thank you, Dan. No, do you know what? I don't actually recall receiving the survey, so I'm going to apologise. I'm assuming I did receive it, and I just didn't. For me, if I don't deal with it in the moment, it's gone. I read the survey, and I'm going. Sorry, this is going to sound really flippant, but I'm going. So what? What are we doing with this? What is the impact of the investment in the time, your team's time, to do a survey that 80% of the organisation probably are ignoring? If it was a statutory requirement to do an internal audit survey, I would say we have to do it. But I'm trying to be pragmatic here because I know how busy everyone is. Why do we do it when the response rate is so poor? And what, more importantly, James, what are we doing with the responses? What specific actions did you take this year after last year's survey? Thank you, Chair.
This is actually all part of the drive for continuous improvement. So under the standards, we have a quality assurance and improvement program, which is designed to, obviously we have a set of performance indicators that measure our performance each year, but what we've also got is indicators that look at how we as a service are improving. the satisfaction survey is part of that. We issue post-audit satisfaction surveys, so every time an audit is completed, the people involved receive a satisfaction surveys, which is about the performance, more about the performance of the individual auditors. This is about the performance of the service. So it's something we're supposed to do. We may need to look at how frequently we do it, whether it's annual or biannual, I don't know. But yeah, that's the reason for doing it. And obviously the actions we take are in how we deliver our service and things like that.
Chair, I just thank you for that answer. And I'm sorry if my question was flippant in any way. It wasn't intended to be. I do think we might want to have to look at this. I think, you know, let's get into the 21st century. We could be doing pulse surveys. We could be doing whole lots of stuff. I agree the post-audit surveys are probably really important. Because actually, also, you could be giving some feedback on the service, for how well they performed during the audit, things like that. I just think it's great to see this every week, but you know, just think about how long it took you to put the report together, let alone anything else.
Yeah, no, I agree. There may be alternative, like pulse surveys and things like that. There may be alternative things we can look at that might be a bit more efficient and streamlined, so we can certainly take that away and look at that.
Chief Operating Officer, please.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the right question to ask, the so what question. Absolutely. When you're investing in this kind of exercise, what you're going to and maybe there is something about future reports. If we continue doing this, there needs to be an action plan at the end of it that says, okay, this is the result that we got. This is the feedback that we got from those surveys, and this is what we're going to do about it. Now, in the past, we've had feedback that's saying, oh, we could do with more training. So James has done that, put on the training, and then we don't get the turnout. You know, so there is a bit of that. You know, we can take horse to water and what have you. But you know, it's the right question, and James and I will take it away and give it some thought.
Any more questions? Thank you, Councillor Perfect.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I just want to say thank you, James, because I know this is a big piece of work. And I think, you know, I've noted even with here on page 64, there's a very nice comment about you here being very approachable with a grant issue. So I wanted to say, on behalf of the committee and as Leader of the Opposition, well done. I was going to say, was that Phil putting that in? Anyway, yeah, anyway. Yeah, conflict of interest. Anyway, right. Let's move on. My point was just going to be to the Chief Operating Officer, just about obviously. I know we do other staff surveys. I think we're doing one at the moment, if I'm correct. That I know other parts of your team run within business intelligence, and it just follows on from Councillor Lawrence's question. I'm just wondering if, and I don't know whether you want this is more something that you need to discuss with the wider corporate management team around if we should be feeding things like this. You know, we could ask a number of questions to follow on from what Councillor Lawrence is saying within that survey, for example, or within a wider survey that gets a lot more marketing from both the marketing and comms department and also from HR and from the corporate management team within the organisation that might drive a bit more input and also make it as part of a more wider council initiative to link it then back in with the council's overall sort of one Medway plan. In terms of the delivery around the sort of corporate strategy and the whole organisation. And I wonder, to come back to Councillor Lawrence's point, if that will then help drive more responses and allow you to be able to get more information from a sort of business intelligence perspective around the entire organisation that will help drive forward James's very good service. Thank you.
Yeah, so you're right. The survey that's being undertaken at the moment is the entire staff survey. With regard to you're also right that in terms of the surveys that James does, we don't do that in the same way for other back office functions. We don't do staff surveys specifically for HR or finance or legal. Maybe we should. Well, but in response to your question as to whether we could build something into the staff survey, obviously that's an option. But we've tried to not change that survey every time we run it because what we want is the comparator each 2 years. So if we started trying to introduce specific questions, it then affects that. We have when it's relevant to do so. So there was a section this time, I think, around LGR specifically to gauge the organisation's understanding and awareness of that. But that's quite exceptional situation. So I understand the idea, but I don't think that's necessarily going to be a runner. And as you say, I'd have to discuss it with C&T and the wider management anyway. Yeah. I think we go back to what I said last time. We'll have a think about how we answer that so what question for you.
Councillor MacDonald.
You just sort of answered it really. So I was going to say, was there an action going to be following on? Because, you know, the committee is saying that. I think the work is brilliant, but also I know the council are handling it very well, but with the reorganisation, I'm going to say it again, people are just thinking about other things, aren't they? And they're thinking about what's going to happen in 2 years' time or whatever. So those pulse things, those quick ones, those ones you can just get for after an internal audit would be better than doing a long-winded one for you, I think. Because I would imagine, not saying about our staff, they're going to wear off, aren't they, in next year and then the year after. It's not going to be the most important thing. Well, that should be, because I think it's a really important exercise to do. But if you're coming back with an action, that's great. Anyway, feel great.
Councillor Bowen.
I just wanted to come back to you, Phil, about changing the survey. I get where you're coming from, that you want to compare, but if you added some extra questions, that's as long as you don't change the current questions. Yeah, so.
Sorry, if I may respond to that. So part of the, I mean, I want to really unpack in my division the response rate, because I don't think I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but the latest suggests that 67% of my division, so I've got about 360 people in my division, 67% completed it, which is good. It's okay, and it's enough for us as an organisation to say we've got confidence that we're hearing the voice of the staff. But I do want to know why the other 33% haven't responded to it, and I'm going to make that a bit of a mission this time to find out why the other third of my team haven't bothered to respond to it. But I suspect one of the issues is the length of it. So the more additional questions you add on it, I just, I think you're putting people off. That's the problem, which is where the concept of these pulse surveys is probably something that we should be exploring better as an organisation. That's it. Yeah, 2 minutes, 5 questions, bang, bang, bang. Yeah. Anyway, hope that answers your question.
Thank you, everybody. Any more questions? Thank you, James. Vice Chair, if you just...
Do you want me to move on to the counter fraud survey?
Yeah, and then we'll agree both of them, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. So the counter fraud results are in Appendix 2, which starts on page 67. Now, this survey was made available to all council employees and elected members, and we received 112 responses, which is a significant improvement on the previous 2 years, although not as high as the 200 we received in 2022. As with previous years, it's pleasing to see that a large number of people are aware that we have a counter fraud and corruption strategy, but there are still high numbers of people who have not seen or read it. It's in the process of being updated to reflect some legislative changes and will then be distributed via meta compliance to all staff. At least that is the aim. Awareness of our services was reasonably high amongst the respondents, although there was an increase in those not aware of any services offered. The numbers receiving awareness training in the last 12 months was disappointing, as sessions have been available monthly via iShare and have only been cancelled due to lack of sign-up. Now, we've also had several sessions as part of the Complete Medway Manager programme that have been well attended. High numbers feel that their teams would benefit from training sessions, and we have been contacting those officers to see what can be arranged. There's been a marked increase in the number of people who know how to report their concerns, although awareness of the types of fraud that the team deal with has dropped in some areas. Now, a large number haven't reported anything to the team in the last 12 months, which could be reassuring, but also may be linked to their lack of awareness of what can be reported. Of those that have reported concerns, a small number advised they did not receive feedback, so we're continuing to work on addressing those gaps. We adopted a set of core principles in 2021 and asked respondents to confirm whether they agreed. These are demonstrated by the team. Following feedback from the previous surveys, we included the option to state unable to answer for those who may have had limited interaction with the service. Now, all 10 statements received at least one negative response, although the most significant number was in relation to the statement is in the right part of the council and has enough resources to effectively carry out its role, receiving 16 negative responses. Now, based on the comments, much as this is down to people feeling that we do not have sufficient resources to adequately tackle fraud, some saying that we could find more if we had more resources. Other comments related to raising the profile of the service and feedback on individual referrals and publicity of the work in general. Now, we issue press releases on successful cases, but perhaps need to do more to publicise things to staff, and it is hoped that now resourcing is more settled, we will see a return to better feedback on individual cases. We also have to factor in that we are unable to provide feedback on cases referred to the Department for Work and Pensions, as we do not know the outcomes. Now, satisfaction with services available scored an average of 7.22 out of 10, which is an increase on the previous year. The 33 respondents who confirmed having received services from the team in the last year scored an average of 8.61 out of 10, with positive satisfaction, which is a score of 8 or higher, from 66.7% of those. Now, again, that's below our target of 90%. We've also categorised what area of work the service related to, and in those individual areas, all of them averaged above 8. Again, any comments or compliments received are detailed with responses as appropriate, and as with the internal audit survey, actions arising from this feedback are all detailed in Appendix 3. I don't know if members have got any questions about the counter fraud side.
Chair, just one question. Once again, it was an interesting read, Andy. James, sorry. Thank you. Do staff do sort of annual mandatory training? And if they do, could we put some of this fraud awareness stuff in that training? Because I think that might, if mandatory, they're going to have to do it. And I think that this is the type of thing that I really think we need to raise the profile. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the actions we've got now, obviously because of our resource, there is no way we could do face-to-face or webinar sessions run by the team. There's no way we could cover off 2,000 employees plus Gravesham's employees as well. What we're actually doing, one of the actions that we've got, is we're looking into digital awareness training. There are products out there that we can issue, and it can be mandatory for all staff. So the idea is the generic training for everyone could be done via that, while the team focus on the service-specific training to really go and talk to teams about how fraud affects their area.
That makes perfect sense, because this is not about skills, this is about information, isn't it? And awareness, so actually delivering it digitally makes. But I just wonder if there is an annual programme of mandatory training, you know, things like data protection and stuff like that.
So the answer to that is yes. There's a suite of mandatory training that's part of induction, and everyone should make sure they're up to date with that. But there's things that we're mandating in a way. We're using the product called Meta Compliance. So the GDPR stuff, the cyber security stuff, that kind of training. We get these bite-size. I think they're really good, actually. You know, they're quite fun, but you're probably learning without necessarily realising it, or it's just kind of reinforcing it in your mind. And we could probably look at trying to do some of that around the fraud awareness stuff, really, couldn't we? Yeah.
You realise you're now going to get a question about how many people do their mandatory training, aren't you? Let's start with chief officers and...
Thank you. Anybody who hasn't done or seen James's training on this have really missed out. I think we should just do a YouTube video, and you could enthuse people, because you actually, the first time I experienced you doing this, you were able to relate it to what people could understand, and it made a difference to people understanding the abuse of whatever the item was. I won't bother to say what it is, but you really did a huge job on that. And actually, I think a very, very short video on that wouldn't go amiss.
Well, if I can come back on that, Chair, although it's not listed in the actions, I'm actually, the presentation that we delivered to members face-to-face in the past, what we're actually looking at doing, because I know you've got a very heavy training schedule as well, what we're looking at is actually recording the talking over that presentation so that it can be issued to members as a video to watch, and then you can watch it at your own leisure. So that's something we're working on at the moment, although it's not specifically noted in the action plan.
I'm glad it's going to members, but I think it would probably benefit some of the staff as well, especially at a reasonably senior level, because it's the sort of thing that people, they don't think about in their day-to-day life. But if they're made aware of it, I think, oh, they might be a little more observant. Thank you for that, James. Really appreciate it. Vice Chair, thank you.
I move the recommendation at page 51 that the committee is recommended to note the results of the internal audit and counter-fraud satisfaction surveys and the actions detailed in Appendix 3.
Agreed. Next one is yours, James, as well.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, this is the annual NFI update report. So members last received an update on the NFI exercises in July 2024, detailing the progress with the 2022-23 and 2023-24 exercises. Now the 2022-23 exercise having been completed last year. Since the last update, we have made significant progress with the work from 23-24 exercise, and the more recent 24-25 exercise is also in progress. Now, work on 23-24 has actually been concluded with all matches addressed and dealt with, resulting in additional council tax of almost 74,000 and liability increase for future years in excess of 49,000. Matches received for 24-25 have all been passed to individual services for checking, although the council tax matches remain with counter-fraud. Now, a large number of those matches have been checked, although the additional 3,000 plus HMRC matches were received a bit later, and we're yet to check those. I'm currently reviewing the previous results for those matches to see whether it is worth doing, as it is very resource intensive, and I don't think we got a lot out of it last time. We are monitoring progress of the other services, checking in monthly with them, and the Intel officers are also available to assist with services if they have any queries, and any suspected fraud is referred back to the team to be investigated. Now, financial savings noted in the financial implications show the results from the two exercises to date, but these are not wholly in addition to savings detailed in counter-fraud updates. Any activity dealt with by counter-fraud is recorded as part of our updates and includes cases that may have been generated as a result of NFI data matching. I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. It's a really interesting report. Again, I had a number of sort of questions, thoughts maybe. I'm just wondering where we are with finding technology to help with this, because obviously you're getting lots of data, processing lots of data. It must be mind-numbingly boring for someone to sit there and go, oh, that's off to finance, that's off to council tax. So where are we in terms of our technology scope? In terms of, I'm always shocked at the number of frauds to do with blue badges, but then am I shocked, or is it just... But given the council passed a motion on the Medway temporary parking scheme at last council, I'm just wondering, given there's this amount of fraud on blue badges, what are we going to end up with on the temporary parking scheme if that ever comes forward? And just finally, in terms of when you farm the data, I imagine you're doing a bit of a deduping and looking at the data initially before you farm it out. Is there a service standard for when you expect departments to have got through their chunk of the thing? Because this is a report as at the end of December, isn't it? Yeah, this is data that was received in December, and we're now in July, and there still seems to be a lot of work to be done on that data. But once again, I'm very appreciative of the fact that everyone's really busy, and this is probably being contained within existing resources. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Yes, in terms of technology, it is very difficult at the moment. Obviously, the Cabinet Office coordinate the National Fraud Initiative exercise. Today, take the data sets from us. There are specified. We're given specifications for all of the data that we have to submit. They obviously work their magic in that big melting pot and send us the results. Now, the matches identify potential discrepancies. Because of time lag, some of them may already have been dealt with. At the moment, I certainly don't know of any technology that we could use that would tell us which ones are genuine and which ones are not. With the concessionary passes, the system provider is able to take that data, drop it into their system, and then it automatically cancels the passes of anyone that's been identified as deceased. That's relatively straightforward. Some of the others, it's very, very difficult. They do require being checked individually because if it's benefits, for example, it may identify 3 or 4 different people living at the address that we potentially don't know about. We've got to check our records to see, do we know about any of those? The reason we've given things out to services to check this year is I've got 2 intelligence officers who normally check these, but across the 2 councils, we received in excess of 20,000 matches, and if I had those 2 officers checking them all, that's all they would be doing, which is why we've passed it out to services. As I say, we are checking in with them a lot more frequent every month to see how things are progressing. The other side to it is what this does identify in a lot of cases is there may not be any fraud or error. It might just be an administrative thing that needs to be done to stop the match coming up again. Now, we could do the check, but we then need the service to actually action a change to stop that, which, again, it's duplicating, so we ask them to do it to try and make it a little bit more efficient. The ideal would be if we could do this on a more frequent basis, rather than it being every 2 years. We run it more frequently, every couple of months, and then there's a nice flow of matches coming in rather than a massive peak, and then it goes, every 2 years. But that unfortunately is something for the future. So, yeah, we are looking into it. In terms of the matches we receive, we used to get the matches at the end of January. For some reason, they decided to move it to the 22nd of December. What they thought we were going to achieve receiving them 2 days before Christmas, I don't know. The aim has always been, certainly, or the expectation has certainly been, to try and check all the Cabinet Office give them a priority rating of high, medium and low. They ask that we aim to check all high priority by September. So obviously that's what's going on, and there are various reports in various services have different ratings, so that's the aim. It's to try and at least get those initial checks done on the higher priority ones by September. I don't know that we're going to meet that this year, but this is the first time we've asked services to do those initial checks rather than us doing it. Certainly for finance, there's already software in place that identifies duplicate payments, so there is no incentive for us to go through those however many thousand matches that relate to finance when a lot of them we know from previous exercises the hit rate percentage is very, very low. I think we identified 2 last time, and we probably put far more resource into it than we actually got back from it. So we are trying to make a balanced judgment on that as well.
Any more questions? Councillor Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, James. I'm just interested to follow on from Councillor Lawrence's point, just about the wider piece, particularly around council tax, because obviously that's where the vast majority of the of this fraud is taking place, and obviously the vast majority, apart from the blue badges, where the vast majority of the sort of outcome in terms of finance is coming from. I'm just interested in terms of the wider piece around the rationalisation around the software, obviously noting all of the difficulties and the sensitivities around data protection, etc. But I'm just interested around the I don't know what you call it, like a one government approach, I guess, the harmonisation of all of this data, where we're in a position where we've currently got electoral services sitting with very valuable data over here, some of which is publicly available, about the number of residents living in a property, council tax discounts, etc. And we've then got our council tax team sitting over here running a separate system with people paying council tax, single person discounts, all of the various things. I'm just wondering, and this isn't necessarily related to the fraud initiative, but it is, because actually some of this could be automatically closed by the rationalisation of that data and identifying individuals and data points individually. I'm just wondering, in terms of the longer term programme, I don't know whether this is happening in other councils or not, but if it is there any way longer term of being able to do this within our software? Because I imagine it can't be that complicated because, well, it probably is complicated, but longer term, you would imagine harmonising this together could save a significant amount of money and reduce that fraud. Thank you.
So within Medway 2.0 is the data lake project. That's exactly what that's trying to do, and one of the outputs from that I'm really hoping that we get to eventually is one single view of the customer, and that will take us so far, because if we got a single view of our residents within the authority, that'd be something. But then it's all those interfaces with HMRC, DWP, and what have you that trying to get agreement. You know, it's not just something that Medway Council can agree with the DWP or the HMRC. It's got to be a nationwide kind of loosening of the rules, isn't it?
I think there's a piece of work around. Again, I will take this. I'm happy to take this away myself and look into this. But I think there's a piece of work that the LGA and others should be doing around sector-led improvement on this, because we should be getting. And I know through gov.uk the government system are going in that direction in terms of the rationalisation of passport data, driving licence, blah blah blah. But I think, you know, we should be hopefully, you know, in a position where all government services, including local government, are included in that, and strategic authorities as part of the devolution framework as well, because longer term, all of that, bringing that together, as we can tell from this report and the work that your team are doing, there's significant amounts of fraud going on in the community, both locally and also nationally. Thank you.
Just picking up on your other question about the temporary parking situation, we would have to assess the fraud risks associated with that. I mean, in terms of Blue Badge, although we've cancelled a lot, that doesn't necessarily mean they would be misused. I mean, this is people that have passed away, and potentially the badges just haven't been returned because they haven't known what to do with them, things like that. I mean, we have undertaken proactive work, as you know from a previous report that we gave you. We went out in December around various parts of Chatham. My officers went out with the civil enforcement officers, and I think we had a 25% hit rate, people misusing badges. So that work, there has been more of that since April, and obviously when you get your next update report, you'll get the results of those as well.
Any more questions? Thank you. Vice Chair, please.
I move the recommendation at page 85. The committee is recommended to note the report.
Agreed? Agreed.
Almost. One more after this one. Yeah, there's a few tonight. There's been lots happening this year. Okay, so in November 2024, we provided an update to this committee about the introduction of the new global internal audit standards and the consultations around how these would be applied to the UK public sector. We have conducted a self-assessment against the standards, taking into consideration the alterations outlined in the application note for the public sector issued by CIPFA, and concluded at that time that we conform with 46 of the 52 standards, partially conform with a further 5, and we're not conforming with 1. The self-assessment can be found at Appendix 2, along with the action plan, and a full list of the actions are also in the covering report. Now, the actions aim to address our gaps in conformance and also strengthen our evidence base in other areas where we are already satisfied we conform, the idea being it will help our conclusions stand up to scrutiny at our next external quality assessment. There has been progress with some of these actions, so actions 2 and 3 are now complete, and members will see the results of those when they receive their next reports in September. The explanation about the qualification requirements for the Chief Audit Executive, as in me, is included in this report at paragraph 5.3 to satisfy action 6, and action 9 is picked up as part of the next item on the committee agenda. Now, as detailed in the report, the one area of non-conformance related to my qualifications, as my professional qualifications were counter-fraud related and not one of those specified in the application note. At the time the report was prepared, I had applied to be chartered by experience, and had a panel interview and assessment on the 21st of July. I'm pleased to say that yesterday I was advised that my application was successful, and following the assessment I have been granted Chartered Internal Auditor status, and with it the CMIIA designation outlined in the application note, meaning we now conform with Standard 7.2, and Action 7 is therefore also complete. The other main area being addressed relates to assurance mapping, and we will coordinate this work through the Risk Management Working Group to assess the levels of assurance across the 3 lines of defence. Those assessments will help to inform future audit planning and ensure that we direct our audit resource to the areas most in need of independent assurance. So I'm happy to take any questions members may have.
Go on, you can't resist it. Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you've taken out one of my questions, because it was going to be, what's Plan B if they said no? But that's great, congratulations. Because I noticed there was no Plan B, and there was no risk assessment of Plan B.
University.
It's an interesting one, this, isn't it? Because, you know, I work in a very highly regulated, and the regulator comes out with another set of requirements, and we all sit there scratching our heads going, how's this actually going to improve things? So I had a general question about how does this actually improve things. How regularly will you do the self-assessment, and who's checking you guys? So who's actually going, you said this, now demonstrate it? Because I think this is quite self-assessments. You know, there's a lot of self-assessment goes on in school, for example, and the self-assessments don't always result in attainment scores that you expect. That's been my experience. But I think what a great job. I'm pleased you haven't had to do too much work to get aligned. But yeah, just those couple of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, so the changes actually, in my opinion, make things a bit simpler, because the number of standards before, there was lots. It was broken down much more. There was lots and lots and lots. And trying to, obviously, the Institute sets the standards, and then previously there was a separate set for the public sector, which was the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards. This time around, they decided they weren't going to have a separate set for public sector, but the application note obviously outlined a few things that needed to be tweaked to make it more relevant to the public sector, which is obviously what we referred to that consultation when we were back in November. While we were doing the assessment itself, we actually did a lot of some of the easier things like tweaking our template documents, things like that, all those changes, so that the action plan itself, when we got to this point, would be a bit smaller. We look at the self-assessment every year, and I mentioned earlier our Quality Assurance and Improvement Programme and Driving Continuous Improvement. Annually, so next July, this committee will receive an update on our progress against that programme, which will include progress against this action plan from this self-assessment. The self-assessments themselves we also conduct annually, and within every 5 years as a minimum, we're supposed to have an external quality assessment, which I mentioned in the introduction. What that would normally do is effectively check, part of that process would be to check our self-assessment. The last assessment was in 23, and we had one in 2018 before that. Both of them came out with a green opinion. That was validation of partly validation of our self-assessment as well. So that's where the scrutiny comes from. We do have external assessments.
Anybody else have questions? No more questions? Thank you. Vice Chair. Shh.
Andrew asked Mike to get all of
That's not a recommendation.
Take Andrew away.
I move the oh, for goodness sake. I move the recommendation at page 93. The committee is recommended to note the outcomes of the self-assessment against the global internal audit standards and the proposed action plan.
It's agreed. Audit Committee review of the terms of reference. How many questions have you on that? I'll ask James to do this.
Thank you, Chair. This will be the last one from me this evening. So we are required to carry out a regular review of this committee's terms of reference, and the latest review is detailed in this report. Now, as noted in the report, there is one amendment proposed which is intended to enhance our conformance with the global internal audit standards. This change means that audits resulting in red opinions, subject to certain conditions being satisfied, will be presented to this committee individually to enable the committee to consider any significant risks more formally, and it follows discussions with the Chair as part of Action 9 from the previous item. As this is the only change, that's all I was going to say by way of introduction, but I'm happy to answer any questions members may have.
Councillor MacDonald.
My only thing for the terms of reference, I don't suppose we can do anything with it, but there are, because you don't always have the same subs, but sometimes when you do have the same subs coming on, they're missing out on information, aren't they? So you know that survey, we might not do the survey again, but you know the survey that you did, even the subs that would always come on didn't get that, or it could feed into it, and it was just a thing, Chair, about that sharing of information a bit wider again during, you know, after your meetings or during your meeting times to the substitutes. If there were, I'm not saying, Steve, we have super subs, but they are normally the same people that come and sub, really. So I'm not saying you can really write in, but it's just about that terms of reference of involving that small group that do come and sub, because they're losing information as well, otherwise, aren't they? I know they can read the papers that Steve sends out, but it's not something we run to, is it? Yeah, you can just tell me there's nothing to put in.
I'm confused. What do you want to do?
Phil's got an answer, come on.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's as you say, this isn't a change to terms of reference necessarily, but I mean, yes, we could have a pool of regular subs, and when we're sending papers out, we send them to those people at the same time. That's fine. That's easy enough. It's not like this is information that needs to be kind of restricted to.
I'm not coming on it. I'm just saying.
No, it's a fair comment. We can do that.
Otherwise, it's great. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? No. Vice Chair, James can go home.
I move the recommendation at page 113. The committee has recommended to approve the suggested changes to terms of reference as set out in Appendix 2 to the report, and recommend the changes to full council for adoption.
Thank you. There are exempt appendices to the report of the next item. If members wish to discuss the contents of these appendices, the committee will need to consider whether it should agree to go into private session. Pardon?
Is there parts we have to knock out or not discussed?
Item 11.
Yeah, I can explain if that would help.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So there are exempt appendices to item 12. So if members wish to discuss those appendices or the contents of them, the committee will need to consider whether it should go into private session. So this is that point at which we would ask members if they want to discuss those appendices.
Yeah, we are. Yes, Chair, I would like to move that we discuss the private appendices and the main report in private, please.
That agreed? Yeah. Thank you. It's agreed that the committee exclude the press and public from this item, and agreed by the committee. Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Bowen, would you like to move that the committee noted and agreed the parties, whatever?
I move the recommendation at page 125. The committee notes and agrees that all. The committee notes the update on local audit reforms. The committee noted and agreed that all parties remain committed to achieving an unqualified audit for the 26-27 financial year.
Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you.